from St. Louis Public Radio. This is Politically Speaking. Senate President Pro Tem Caleb Rowden was widely seen as a top contender to be Missouri's next Secretary of State. But the Columbia Republican pulled the plug on his statewide ambitions. And on the latest episode of Politically Speaking, Rowden explains why he sees political compromise as being devalued in Missouri politics. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
My promise to St. Louis was that I would do the absolute most for each and every person, starting with those who have the very least.
What I wanted to do was look and see what other states are doing.
We have to be willing to change those laws, that they are balanced and they affect everybody equally.
As somebody that grew up in the St. Louis area, in North St. Louis County, I didn't know any lawyers growing up.
We got to find long-term solutions to make government better, but also to be able to provide services to people.
I don't want to leave that federal money that we've been leaving all these years on the table.
We need to be spending this money to take care of Missourians.
I thought we accomplished a lot this year, but a lot more needs to be done.
Welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, St. Louis Public Radio's Jason Rosenbaum. Joining me from mid-Missouri, she is St. Louis Public Radio's state politics and state government reporter,
Sarah Kellogg.
And joining us also from mid-Missouri, I think, he is the Senate President Pro Tem for the Missouri Senate and the senator from the 19th Senatorial District,
Caleb Rowden.
And are you in mid-Missouri right now, Senator?
I am, right in the middle of my hometown.
Oh, well, good. I didn't want to be inaccurate in your specific location. So there's a couple reasons we wanted to have you on today. You made the announcement that you are not actually going to be running for Secretary of State or any statewide offices this year. You had announced you were going to run for Secretary of State last year. Why did you decide to pull the plug on this campaign?
Well, we started the process. We announced latter part of October, I believe, last year. Started to go through the process, raising money, doing all those things, and then obviously hit session, which puts a little bit of a squeeze on your ability to campaign. But we kept Aubrey's my wife. We had kept having conversations. Obviously we knew there was the announcement window in October, but obviously filing, we're in that window now, started at the end of February. And so we knew we wanted to keep talking. We wanted to make sure that this was the right thing to do. It was I told a lot of people when she and I decided to make the decision to run for the House in 2000, I think it would have been 2011. We had been married for about 6 years. We didn't have any kids. A much different stage of life than now, being married for almost 20 years, 3 kids. Just a lot of different variables, and so we wanted to make sure that the decision was right. And at some point we came to the conclusion here in the last few weeks that I think there's better ways that she and I can serve our community and find ways to give back to this community, a community that we love, and also do it in a way that's not potentially harmful for our kids, or it gives us more time to make sure we're investing in our kids in the future. Willem's 11, and so he's entering a pretty important stage of his life. Adele's 5, and Theo's 2. So they're all there doing different things and need us. And so I wanted to make sure that I was making the decision that was in the best interest of the kids, and maybe not the decision that I thought was the best for my political future. So that's the decision we made.
Did you really want to be Secretary of State?
Well, I think if I were to have run for something, Secretary of State was the one certainly that was the most appealing to me. I mean, I think I'm not trying to discount or say anything negative about the other jobs. Secretary of State's a real job. I mean, there's lots of a lot of important things under there, hundreds of employees within the Kirkpatrick building and other places. And it was something that I didn't want to just run and have a title. I wanted it to mean something, to be something, and I thought that SOS was out of all the ones that were available and potentially possible, was the best one. So that was the calculation initially for deciding, hey, let's go the SOS route.
Are you worried that your exit from the contest could give a leg up to someone like Senator Denny Hoskins, who has been a thorn in the side of Senate leadership for quite some time?
Yeah, I came to the conclusion at some point that running or not running based on who is going to be in that position, whether or not Denny wins or not, was not really a good reason to make the decision. I think we've made decisions for a long time as a family that have been, outward looking, trying to make sure that we're finding ways to give back, and I think maybe sometimes to the detriment of ourselves and just decisions that we're making. So, yeah, I mean, does he have a chance to win? Sure. Do I think he's going to win? I don't know. But at the end of the day, I came to the conclusion, just for me personally and for us as a family, that's not a particularly good reason to make a decision. One that's I think is terribly important and at a very critical time, a pivotal time in my family and mine's future. So we kind of put that aside and made a decision based on different things.
Do you plan on endorsing or backing anyone else for this race so far?
We haven't done it. I don't know that we will or not. We've got some money that we might end up using in various places to help folks that we think are willing and able to carry the mantle that I've carried, which is just a good common sense conservative type of governance. But haven't really thought a whole lot about it as of yet, specifically in that race. So time will tell. We'll make a decision at some point.
You mentioned that consensus building was a trait that used to be admired in the legislature, and now that is no longer the case. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I think everybody runs on a platform. Everybody runs as a member. Most people run as a member of a party, whether it's Republican or Democrat or Libertarian. But when you get to the legislature, when you get to Congress, wherever you are, you're charged with governing, and governing, I think, looks and feels a lot different than campaigning does more times than not. It doesn't mean that you don't do the things, you don't hold the same values that you said when you were campaigning, but you guys cover the legislature for a long time, have for a long time. A lot of the issues that we talk about, specifically in the Senate, aren't really all that partisan. 90%-ish of the votes that we take are bipartisan in nature, and so I think the focus on the red line type things that tend to get people ginned up, and the use of rhetoric and language that I think folks sometimes know to be not true, but just do it to try to get a little rise out of the constituency. That just was not ever something that was appealing to me. I don't care enough about being in politics to not be willing to explain the nuance to people, and so that has gotten me in hot water over times. I've taken votes that the further right contingent of the Republican Party didn't appreciate, and that's fine. It's the nature of the beast. But I came to the conclusion a long time ago, whether or not I was going to run for office in the future, that it wasn't worth changing who you are. It wasn't worth lying to voters. It wasn't worth trying to drop seeds of untruth just to try to get them to see you in a better light. And so all of that stuff has weighed on me over the course of time. It's just not who I am. You guys know me well enough to know I don't say a lot of negative things about other people. Everybody has their motivations. Everybody has their reasons why they decided to get into politics. And for me now, why I've decided to get out. So I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for anybody else. And I think, they probably would have a different view of why they're doing what they're doing and trying to get to a place that allows them to have the power to make the change that they want to make. It's just not who I am. And at some point it got pretty tiring to have to, either you play the game or you become, you get called names and you're not a Republican, you're all these other things. It's at some point we made the decision it wasn't worth it. So.
Well, I want to be more specific about what you're talking about. You had voted when you were in the House against a proposed constitutional amendment that would have allowed businesses to deny service to, people that want to buy a service for a same-sex wedding. And you had also voted for Medicaid expansion when it came up for a vote, I think a couple of years ago. Are those the types of things that you think could have been used against you in a primary process where, like, being the quote unquote most conservative person kind of has premium with the Republican base?
Yeah, I mean, I think, specific to the short answer is yeah. I mean, I've got plenty of votes I'm sure that could have gotten used against me. I have no reason to believe, based on the amount of money that we had and the amount of money that had been committed, I think I was going to win this race. I don't think that anybody else, at least in the current field, was going to have enough money to define me in any other way than what I could define myself. So I wasn't, it wasn't a matter of trying to sidestep those types of votes because I'm not sure the money was going to be there in a down ballot statewide. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. There's votes that I've taken, plenty of them that I thought were the right thing at the moment, and I always had the ability to, and I had to because of the positions that I was in leadership. I was able to defend that, talk about why I did it, the decision-making process that got me to where I was. Those are not always. It's not an easy process to get to the point on big kind of contentious issues that are going to be kind of political punching bags. It's not always easy to get to that vote, and so I used a pretty stable and kind of constant process. I've always had really, really good staff. We talk a lot about these things, folks inside the building, folks outside the building, and kind of get to the point we say, okay, this is what the right thing is in this moment. It may not be the most politically expedient thing. I remember getting yelled at by my some of my political folks about the Medicaid expansion vote a few years ago. But we kind of stuck to that process. The folks inside the building, we stuck to the process and said, hey, look, let's define what right is based on, what our principles are and what our core beliefs are. And then let's make the vote that most closely resembles that. And so I'm proud that we've been able to stick to that. And I'm going to walk out, with my head held high. And I think it would have been hard for anybody to represent this area and this area being a center left area, and to climb into the position of leadership that I did, and not operate the way that you operated. And so I think we did everything the right way, and I'm proud of the resume and the legacy that we're going to leave.
And conversely, even though I mentioned that you strayed from your party on a couple of those issues, you also voted with your party on things like banning most abortions and barring most minors from accessing puberty blockers and hormone therapy. Also, the so-called Second Amendment Preservation Act, which disincentivized law enforcement from trying to enforce federal gun laws. I know that you probably agreed with those bills philosophically, but do you think that those types of things that you voted on contributed to the atmosphere where consensus building, at least between the two parties, wasn't seen as something worth doing as much anymore?
Well, I think no, I don't know that I would see that, because the last couple of years, I have a really good relationship and have had a traditionally good relationship with all of the, minority leaders that I've served with when I've been in these positions of leadership. Gina Walsh and now J.J. Rizzo and I are very close. You have there are. You can never lose sight of the fact that when I was the majority leader and now when I'm the pro tem, you are leading a still historically large Republican majority. I got there in 2012, and the House had a veto-proof majority. The Senate had a veto-proof majority. I've never, in 12 years, served in a legislature that didn't have veto-proof Republican majorities. So that comes with the pressure and the motivation to do some of the things, that Republicans sent you there to do. So, there are red line days. I call them red line days. There are days where it's going to be the majority saying we are going to get the thing done that we feel like we need to get done, and the minority is either going to have to get out of the way or find some compromise that you can live with, or we resort to nuclear options. That doesn't happen often, but it does happen some. It has happened numerous times since I've been there, and so I don't think Republican, especially this size of Republican majority, doing really Republican things is bad. You're going to have those days. You just don't have many of them. I think it's the other stuff. It's the sitting down and going through and kind of tackling a really complex utility issue or a really complex public safety issue. Those are the things that really matter to people. If you ask the swath of the center left and the center right, call it 60% of the electorate, 30% on both sides of the middle, what they want a good opportunity for their kids to go to school. They want a job. They want a community that's safe. They want a reliable energy grid, and everything else is kind of secondary. I think if we talked about those things and did those things well, and some days we do, some days we don't, it gives us a license to do some of this other stuff. But we got to make sure, and the folks that are going to govern after I'm gone, you got to make sure you're focusing on things that people care about, because it doesn't matter how red the state is right now, which I think it certainly is a 55-45, maybe even 57-43 type of Republican majority in the state. But that's going to change. The Democrats held the majority for decades before the Republicans took over. And so my advice and my hope for Republicans who will govern after me is make sure you are not at the expense of things that people are talking about, doing the things that kind of appease the far right parts of your party. You got to do them both, because if you don't do the thing that matters to people, eventually they're going to kick you out, and that's just the nature of the beast.
I want to move on to this session, and one of the subplots of this legislative session, at least in the beginning, was this intense legislative fight between GOP leadership and the Missouri Freedom Caucus. They had argued that people like you weren't prioritizing conservative priorities. What did you make of that criticism?
Well, I mean, they're always going to find something to criticize me for. It's been a lot of different things over the course of my 6 years that I've been in one of those two leadership positions. It comes with territory. I mean, I think those folks, for the most part, I've said this numerous times now, the best way I can describe it is they broke the place so that they could say it was broken. And this notion that that everything's rigged and government's it's all one big conspiracy. That does gin up some emotion with certain folks, and I get it. I understand it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to stoop to that level. I'm going to be honest with folks that I represent. And sometimes I'm going to agree with them, and sometimes I won't. But those guys have resorted to kind of a different way of trying to use the Senate as a platform to advance their political careers. I don't think it's going to be successful, but we'll find out. I guess this year is a pretty good case study. I think they'll have a Freedom Caucus member in most all of these statewide races and in the congressional race. So we'll see. I never took it too personal. I can still sit down with Senator Eigel most days and have a perfectly pleasant conversation. We have moments where we disagree, and those have been well documented over the course of time. But we still have managed to maintain a cordial relationship, and we'll take the next few weeks as they come. We have the FRA, we've got the budget. I assume both of those things are going to be terribly complicated and terribly painful, but we'll get them both done. And I think it's always been I've always known what I wanted to accomplish when I kind of went into battle in one of these things. I think the fatal flaw, and I've told this to Bill and some of those guys over the course of time, they get into a situation, they don't know what the positive outcome is. They want noise, they want chaos, they want people thinking that they're doing the Lord's work in some sort of weird way, but they don't know what a win is. And so if you can't define your win in the legislature, then you're just kind of going to wander aimlessly, and you're going to ask other people to do your job for you. They've tried to take shortcuts, repeatedly over the course of time, while everybody else has just been putting their their head down and doing their work and asking people for votes and getting votes out of committee and getting chairmen to move their bills. And, that's the nature of the process. It's way more complicated, and it's it requires more work. But a vast majority of senators do that, and even some of their folks, Andrew Koenig is a perfect example of somebody who knows how to get a bill done, and even though he's a part of their crew, has still been incredibly successful, was the sponsor of the education bill that we just passed. So you can still do your work and be extremely conservative. Some of those guys have just decided not to do the work, and they just would rather make noise. And, that's the decision they've made, and wasn't the decision I was going to make.
You did take some action this session and stripped some of the Freedom Caucus members of their committee leadership posts. Do you think that was the right move in retrospect?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it was, not something I enjoyed. I think people thought that, I was itching to do something like this. I mean, it's never. You have to be a kind of a weird type of personality to want to embrace it and invite that level of conflict. But I think specifically as it relates to what was going on in that moment, which was that group of folks basically shutting the place down to the point that Cindy O'Loughlin, who, for folks who don't know, is the majority leader, controls all the business of the floor, wasn't even able to do the most basic elements of her job, approving the journal, those sorts of things. And there's been, fights and conversations since then when Democrats have filibustered, well, why aren't these folks getting kicked off the committees? I've told these guys repeatedly, and I'll tell anybody, listen, if you filibuster a bill because you have issues with a bill, or even, issues with a bill sponsor, that's not something I appreciate or not something that I invite, but I know that happens from time to time. I'm not going to take any action against you. That's the nature of the Senate. The Senate is about using the levers of power that you have to get the things done. Those guys were hijacking the place and not even letting Cindy do her job, which are two very, very different things. If they were just filibustering bills in the early parts of session, they would have never been stripped of their committees. They would have never lost their parking spots. But the idea that they were going to run the place, that they were going to take the place over, six people could overtake the will of the other 27, 28 folks, both Democrat, but also a huge majority of the Republican caucus, was just not something that we were willing to stand by and watch. So it was certainly the right decision. I'd do it again if I had to. Not something that you enjoy, but I think it was certainly necessary to say, hey, look, you are disrespecting this place to the point that nobody lobbyists who've been there for 50 years have never seen it this bad. We're going to try to figure out a way to take control back for the purpose of letting the Senate be the Senate and not letting the Senate just be a joke and a laughingstock.
A lot of this tension in the beginning was the idea that the Senate was not moving fast enough on initiative petition resolutions, which would make it harder to amend the Constitution. That has now gone through the Senate, but you ended up voting, along with other Republicans and Democrats, to strip out so-called ballot candy from Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman's proposal that would make the Constitution harder to amend, and that included a provision stating that non-citizens couldn't vote in an election. Why did you vote the way you did?
Well, I mean, non-citizens already can't vote. Everybody that knows anything about politics knows that. I think it is. It's an interesting conversation because clearly, you hearken back to Clean Missouri. Everybody has used ballot candy over the course of time to try to make their, somewhat unpopular or maybe not popular enough underlying provision a little bit more popular. I could make the case internally. Well, we're just returning the favor, and could have voted to leave that stuff in there. I think it's twofold. The reason why, one, internally, it was the only way we were going to advance the bill. So the bill goes to the House now. The House obviously has the ability to put that back in, do whatever they want to do, throw in the trash can or some combination thereof. So the House is going to take action whenever they take action. But it was the way in that moment that we were able to advance the thing and keep the thing going. And so you make those calculations every once in a while. We were never going to PQ initiative petition reform in February. A PQ in February would have put us in special session on the FRA, put us in special session on the budget probably. I mean, any number of dominoes that would have happened. So it was just, you put it in context, it was the right decision for that particular moment. But I also think, voters, I think voters are, I wish they were more engaged, and I wish they paid more attention to the nuance, but I also think voters generally are pretty smart. So I think I think you could make the case on initiative petition reform. The best argument for IP reform is, you through the concurrent majority, you give folks in some of these rural congressional districts a little louder voice than they have right now. That's a good message, and I think that's something that without the ballot candy and throwing a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't matter into it, I think if that message and that story was told well enough, I think could resonate. So I struggle with ballot candy in general because I think I have a little more respect for voters, and hopefully they live up to that in all the various initiatives that get put in front of them. But it was the right decision at that particular moment for sure.
There was a bit of a kerfuffle last week over comments made by Senator Coleman in a House committee, pretty much asking the House to put the ballot candy back on the resolution, and then also mentioned a PQ, or ending debate, which spurred a lot of big feelings from Senate Democrats who are not happy about that. Thoughts about that, and is a PQ on the table if the resolution comes back to the Senate changed?
Well, I certainly think talking about a Senate PQ in a House committee is probably in not in particularly good form, and I think I haven't spoken specifically to Mary Elizabeth. I think she probably knows that. There's Senate business, and there's ways that we go about trying to get to the point that we want to get to, and I think it was what it was. I mean, I think it stuff like that happens every once in a while. PQ is always on the table. I mean, there's 24 of us. We only need 18 to PQ something. I think there are. I for one, I think there are others who have been very, very hesitant to move forward with any sort of PQ. I voted against a PQ on a special session and on concurrent jurisdiction a few years ago when I was the majority leader, and that bill went over to the House and died. So I know how big I've lived through them. I've been a part of them. I've seen what happens after they are implemented in the Senate, and it's not fun. It's not pretty, and I certainly think that anything that we do that makes the Senate more like the House, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, just in the fact that the House is obviously structured and the rules are very, very different. It's very, very easy to pass something in the House, and if the Speaker and the floor leader are together and they both want it over there, it's going to happen. I mean, there are very few instances in history where that's not been the case. I don't want the Senate to be like that because, one, I think there is power in the minority having a voice, but two, I'm not sure we're always going to be in the majority, and so I think the way I would want to be treated if I was a part of a 10-person minority in the Senate is partly a motivation for how I try to treat those guys and give them the ability to sit at the table and be a part of a discussion. If we can find consensus, we can get a bill done. Numerous things, the heartbeat bill, all the stuff that Jason mentioned at the beginning of the interview that we've done, all was done without a PQ, with the exception of SJR 39, which I wasn't in the Senate for. So we've done a lot of big things without PQs. I think you can get almost anything done without it. So is it on the table? Yes. Is it a last resort? Yes. And hopefully we don't have to use it here in the next few weeks for sure.
And there has been a lot of conjecture and just outright statements from the Freedom Caucus and House Speaker Dean Plocher about wanting to sequence the so-called IP reform in August and then vote on a potential abortion legalization measure in November. But I read an article this week that included a quote from GOP strategist Greg Keller, who really wants the abortion initiative to go on in August because he feels that it will be easier to defeat, given that there'll be a lot of Republican primary voters. And for full disclosure, Keller has told me basically the same thing a few months ago.
Yeah.
Like, what's your kind of thought on the whole sequencing thing? Because even though I understand like there's legal disagreements over whether the threshold increase will affect the abortion initiative, like a lot of grassroots Republicans are seeing IP reform as a way to kill the abortion initiative. So what's your thought on this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a double-edged sword for us. I mean, I think you do. I think Greg is right in that if you want to defeat the measure, the best place to do it is in August. I think if you put IP reform on the ballot in August in hopes that it passes and the court allows it to be in effect for a November abortion initiative, that only works, one, if it passes on the ballot, which I am a little suspect, and I've said this publicly numerous times, I'm not sure it will pass. But two, that the court doesn't say, well, hey, they started this process under the old regime, and so we're going to let the whatever ballot initiatives other than abortion would be on the November ballot, live under the old rules. There's very few ways in which I think we are successful in that kind of space. I think that there are plenty of ways where we end up hurting ourselves. If abortion is on the November ballot, what does that do to competitive generals, of which there aren't a tremendous number, and certainly I don't expect any of the statewides to be competitive, but numerous House districts, a couple Senate districts, at least maybe a few Senate districts where something like that on the ballot, and a Trump-Biden rematch, what that does. I mean, there's a whole host of things that I think you think about the abortion thing kind of in one context, but then what does that do relative to all of the other elections that are going to happen? And like I said, there's very few kind of paths that lead to success for us. I think that there are a number of paths that lead to failure, and so I mean, ultimately it's the governor's decision. I have not had great in-depth discussions with him about what he's thinking, but I think there's going to be a ton of money spent against IP reform. There would be a ton of money spent for some sort of pro-abortion initiative. So money in politics is a big part of the game. So, I mean, I think we start behind the eight ball on both of those things. But I hope, voters are, like I said, I hope they're intuitive enough and pay enough attention to understand the nuance of what they're voting on. The abortion thing specifically is very, very involved, and I think goes much further than basically the kind of introduction of Roe v. Wade into the space in Missouri. I think it does more than that. I think it's a different type of conversation. So we'll see what happens, but it's not a great position for us, I think, regardless of what we do, which I think Keller's point is certainly right on that regard.
You mentioned the budget and the FRA, which is the Federal Reimbursement Allowance, which is a tax hospitals place on themselves in order to fund the state's Medicaid program. You kind of suggested those could be contentious processes in the second half of session. Do you think you could pass both of those things without coming out the other side feeling like it was basically a war to get them passed? Or more specifically, do you think you can get those passed without being forced to go into special session to either pass the budget or pass the FRA?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be a war. I haven't heard anything, the rhetoric from the Freedom Caucus guys to make me think it's not going to be. I think we can get it done without going to special. I think again, I would challenge those guys to figure out what a win is, because you're not going to stop the FRA. We're not going to not pass a budget. Those would be two of the most irresponsible things that we could do, certainly from a conservative perspective. And so you're not going to, if the goal is to stand in the way, in total, that's not a realistic goal. It's not going to happen. So I don't actually know what a win looks like for them, other than just chaos for its own sake. And maybe that's what they're interested in. I don't honestly know. But I think we'll get it done. If it's in special, it's in special. And for the folks who are running, it cuts into their ability to go campaign and go tell voters why they're the best person for the job. I don't know if that's a motivation or not, but it's like I said, we're not going to not do it. It's just a matter of how painful it is and how much time it takes. But we'll get there. We'll get there by the end of it for sure.
Well, Senator, thank you very much for your time this morning. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can find all of our coverage at stlpr.org. And Senator, where can people find you on social media or the internet where you want to be found?
Yeah, Twitter and Facebook, just at Caleb Rowden, and CalebRowden.com is still the campaign website for a little bit longer.
Until it just fades away when you don't pay for it anymore.
That's right. GoDaddy takes it away from me.
Thank you very much. Until next time, so long. Politically Speaking is produced by Sarah Kellogg, Rachel Lippman, and me, Jason Rosenbaum. The show is edited by Fred Ehrlich. Read all of our coverage at stlpr.org. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Politically Speaking by searching the term Politically Speaking on Apple Podcasts.